we are super excited to continue talking about Newport Jazz with Eric Krasno, who will be appearing this year with So Live, fresh off a few dates at the Blue Note.
Yeah.
Unlike a lot of the people we're talking to during this series, Eric, you have a pretty deep history with Newport Jazz, having played for years with So Live and having studied jazz in the Northeast in New England. Do you remember the first time that Newport Jazz, crossed your mind? Either you going as a fan or playing with So Live or another band?
Well, it was always something I'd heard about, and it was kind of this legendary festival. And I remember being really excited when Soul Live was asked to play there. And as over the years, playing so many other festivals, you hear about it being kind of this like archetype for many festivals that came after it. Including New Orleans Jazz Fest. And I know George Wein was kind of a legend. In terms of not only creating a great festival but paying homage to the great jazz culture and the
Yeah.
artists that have played there. It's always the top notch of whatever kind of scene is happening at the time in jazz, but it's always been great because it always kind of includes the legends. But as Soul Live was in the early 2000s, it includes young artists and new up and coming artists, and it's exciting to see it kind of expand to include um, even more artists. This year we have a even more diverse lineup than I've seen in the past.
Definitely, definitely. And as you mentioned, Newport Jazz really is in a lot of ways the original American music festival. George, of
Yeah,
course, created Newport Folk and the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival, and
yeah,
many of the festivals that, in fact, most of the festivals that they came after his events really used what he did as a blueprint. Even
right.
Woodstock used members of his production crew and looked to him for inspiration. Can you talk a little bit about some of the legends that you cross paths with, both on and off the stage, back in 2008 when Soleil was there during a pretty
I do remember
fun
John
for you guys?
Schofield being there, and he was kind of the one of the few people that I knew, and I remember being like, "Oh, there's Schofield! Like, I can go talk to him. We know him." And I remember hanging out with Herbie Hancock there, and he seems to be kind of like a mainstay at Newport Jazz. But actually, a funny little side story that my niece, who was only a few years old at the time, went and ended up doing chanting and doing like some meditation with Herbie backstage
That's
because
awesome.
my brother knew him through the music world. He had managed an artist that was touring with him and collaborating with him. Anyway, so I remember like my niece essentially introducing me to Herbie. Be like, "This is Herbie. We just did some meditation." So I mean, that was kind of a cool way to meet Herbie, who we actually got to play or got to um, meet various other times throughout the years. So
That's
it's one of those things, right? And I remember also that Chevy Chase was the MC at our stage, so there was one of those things where it was just you're walking around in this like beautiful setting, but also kind of at least in my experience, like getting to meet so many heroes as you're walking around, and it's just such a cool setting for a festival, and it seems like really laid back, and people are really at ease, including the artists.
No, no, definitely. No, you mentioned, your niece having that amazing opportunity to meditate with Herbie Hancock. And I know both you and I still have pretty young kids, but I, remember going to Newport, when I was younger myself and seeing kids running around and that family feel and that feeling of community really, I think, is something that makes it such a unique event. And I think that leads to maybe some freedom for musicians on stage and the chance for collaborations to take place and something. Do you feel that especially at an event like Newport Jazz?
Absolutely, and I think the spirit of the event is a lot of the musicians kind of walk around and see some other people play and collaborate, and it kind of breeds that collaboration feeling. And you can see even, and a lot of it is like in the billing this year, that people, different guests sitting in with different people, and we just as musicians we love that atmosphere because we all came into being a musician through being a fan first, so I mean, for us to get to see and potentially collaborate with some of our favorite players. Um, it's like a dream come true, you know.
Definitely, definitely. No, as you also mentioned, this year's Newport Jazz, not only honors, the jazz genre and its history and some of the major players for decades now, but also kind of, highlights how it connects to the relics world, the jam world, and kind of the rock-based improvisational world. And, you've always kind of hugged those two different worlds, dating back to the late 90s and early 2000s, at venues like Wetlands and the Knitting Factory. There was bands that were inspired by the Grateful Dead and kind of the early jam band scene, and then there was this really cool acid jazz scene, and they were kind of going on simultaneously, and you wouldn't necessarily know that they were different genres really, based on the fans there and kind of the atmosphere. Can you talk a little bit about your thoughts at that time? I mean, you were playing more maybe jazz rooted music at that point, though
Yeah.
of course had a history with the Dead and Fish and the jam scene.
Yeah, I kind of I had a lot of music around me as a kid. So my dad was really into jazz and soul, but also the Beatles. Then my brother, they kind of introduced me to the Grateful Dead and that world. And I was really into Hendrix and all that kind of stuff. So I grew up in a unique time where I had access to so many different styles of music. So as I learned to play music, I learned kind of initially through rock and roll and then found funk and found jazz and soul and started to, really explore that. So, and then I was really into hip hop too. Hip hop was really current when I was a kid. So like the Beastie Boys and Run DMC and all that was just happening. And so, when we created Soul Live, we brought all of that to the table and places like the Wetlands. It was really just that the jam band scene was open to all of it, and that really inspired us because they didn't care if we were, if we had a rapper on stage and then a singer on stage and then like we played an Allman Brothers song and then played, a James Brown song. It all was fair game. And, I think that was really important as we found our sound because we loved experimenting with all of those things. And I think the places like the Wetlands really helped support that. And then what eventually became Bowl Live, it was really important to me too, just like being able to collaborate with so many different people. So also as a producer, I got to meet a lot of people that I ended up working with and establishing relationships with. So, and I see that culminating in so many things nowadays. Like people, I love that it's becoming genre list. We call it the Newport Jazz Fest, but there's just it's. I think the underlying thing is improvisation and spontaneity, and that's kind of the most important thing with a lot. Like when I hear the word jazz, nowadays, I think the most important thing is that we're improvising and we're doing things that are fresh and new and involved in spontaneity. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's, bebop, it's,
Right.
so you see that in Newport. I mean, from like Kamasi Washington to J Rad to Soul Live, and I think Anderson Paak is on the bill, but
Yeah.
all those people they're all innovative musicians, and I think that's the most important thing.
Absolutely. I was going to mention the hip hop thing because I think that one of the most exciting developments in jazz in recent years is kind of the infusion of this hip hop ethos, even if they don't actually have MCs on there, with what one could consider traditional improvisational instrumental music. And you were doing a lot of that with Soul Live and in your production work, well before
Yeah.
it hit the mainstream, but kind of in this post Kendrick world, a lot of those players have a scene of their own, very similar to kind of your world in the Wetlands world, where people collaborate in different configurations, and it might be under someone's name, but you see a lot of the same players working on different projects together simultaneously.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I love seeing that and I love being a part of that, And the cool thing about, the quote unquote jam scene, like I said, is they love to see something that's happening brand new right in front of their eyes. And I think that's something that the Grateful Dead, you know, were so brave to do. They would play in front of like, thousands and thousands of people and completely change their set every single night and improvise. And it became this thing where the audience was a part of the journey. And I think that has seeped into so many different worlds. I mean, it kind of started with jazz, but it's like rock and roll and hip hop and all different styles of music are embracing that spontaneity and that improvisation.
Definitely. And as you mentioned, Joe Russo's Almost Dead is one of the headliners of this year's Newport Jazz Fest. And you've been playing with those guys in different configurations for decades, really. And I think when you guys probably first crossed paths about 20, 25 years ago, you guys were all playing a lot different styles of music than you are now. Do you remember the first time that you first met and started playing with Joe and Marco and all
Yeah, in
those guys?
fact, I found some pictures kind of recently from those days because we had a studio in Tribeca, Velour, my brother. We had
Yeah.
the label in the studio right there, and the old knitting factory was right around the corner. And they used to play in the tap bar, Joe and Marco, and they used to always invite me down, and I would kind of, every night that I was around, I would pop over there and sit in with them, and we would just have a blast. I just loved how, again, like experimental and different they were. It was organ and drums, but it was just such a unique flavor. Again, it's like it's instrumental, but I don't know if you call it jazz. I don't know what you call it. It was like genreless. So that really excited me. And I actually have a picture that I think, did I post that recently, of me and Derek Trucks, um, or I brought him down to go see them. Uh,
Wow.
probably their third or fourth week into that residency, and we look like little babies down there. But that was the beginning. But I played with both of them so much
Yeah.
over the years.
We have some good baby face Derek Trucks photos here from Wetlands days.
I bet. Yeah, I bet.
Well, I guess speaking of that time, you're in the midst of your second run of Blue Note shows with Soul Live, and Soul Live shows are more select these days. We don't get as much as we did a few years ago. How's the run been? And what, from your perspective, what's it like, kind of reconnecting with the Evans brothers after a little bit of time? At least having been playing so many shows in a row.
Yeah, it's been great. I mean, to be honest, in the last handful of years, so many of our shows included different guests, like announced guests, where we would do some soul live, but a lot of it be focused on like learning songs from other people or focusing on other people, which we love. But it's been nice to just dig into our catalog. We played 8 shows last week, 8 shows this week. And, for the first 3 or 4 nights, we didn't repeat anything, which was a challenge, to just dig back into our catalog. But it was cool because the Blue Note is a perfect place to do that because it's kind of low pressure. And like last night, we were just taking requests from the audience, and there were certain songs we didn't remember, and we'd play the A section, and then we'd stop and be like, it was very loose and fun for us because we haven't played a lot in the last few years, so it's been kind of a nice way to ease back into it before playing in front of like big festival crowds, is to just get a bunch of shows under our belt in a small venue, and also just spend some time together, like catching up and hanging out and talking about music and kind of what we're digging into. But I will say it's been crazy. We've done so many thousands of shows, and we have so many songs and so many albums. Digging into the material, like my brain sometimes wouldn't know where the next thing, what the next part of the song was, but my fingers would just know. It's just this kind of built in. So it was interesting, kind of just being in the moment and realizing, okay, this is really, we've being a band for 25 years now almost. Those first 15 years there's a lot of training in those 15 years, and
Yeah.
now it becomes easier to like tap into it, as long as I'm like nice and warmed up.
Right, right. Well, that muscle memory definitely, comes through.
Yeah,
But
it
when you
kicks
have
in.
when you have fans requesting songs live, especially when you haven't played, at least shows where you've dug so deep into the catalog for quite some time, were there tunes where you're like, okay, we need to brush up on that for tomorrow, or is pretty much
Yeah, there's
everything
there's
there?
one or two that we need to brush up on. Mainly the ones that we had horn section stuff on, because you kind of have to because we had different eras of Soul Live with horns, that some of the songs we wrote during that time we need to adapt it to the trio setting. So there was a few like that. They're like, okay, we got to like figure out how to pull that off without the horns. But we actually did a pretty good job. Before the shows came, I sent like a list of like 80 songs or something,
Wow.
and we've tackled a lot of them. I actually need to do some stats and see how many we've done so far, but we've definitely done a lot.
Well, we like it. We like a good stat here at Relics, and
Yeah, I bet. Maybe I'll work on that and send it over.
definitely. It's interesting. From the show I saw, there's just something about the three of you guys playing together that definitely recalls a certain period of time. I know musically for you and for Neil and Alan and for myself as a music fan. That I think you said it right. In the later years when you were doing these long bow live runs and other kind of residencies where there was a lot of guests, you were almost the house band for whomever
Right,
would join you guys, and that shifted the sound left or right depending on who you were working with.
right.
When you kind of prepare for a run like this, where and looking to the Newport Jazz and other events you have coming up, where you're really focused on the three of you guys, are there certain periods of the band's work that you now look back on, you're like, wow, like this really was the definitive sound of the three of us versus what we
For
became?
sure. I'd say there was like a few like kind of moments in the evolution. I mean, the first couple albums really had a lot of compositions that I think were really unique. And looking back at it and playing those songs with a little bit with a more perspective, I kind of realized like, oh, this was something very unique. Because there was a lot of different organ trios that you've heard over the years that just kind of play the boogaloo thing, but there was, I have to give Neil a lot of credit. His depth of harmony, and I go back and kind of relearn the song. I'm like, man, this is some deep stuff for like a 20-year-old to be writing.
Yeah.
And a lot of it we all wrote together, but the stuff, his harmonic approach is so unique, man, and also just how he plays. There's just nobody that really does that it's funny because when you are with people in your earlier in your career and they're that important, as a musician, it's like, and then I've played with so many thousands of people, and I realize even more now how important that is. And not just that, I mean, Alan's playing and how they connect together as brothers and how we communicate. Like last night we wrote a set list. We played two songs from the set list and didn't go back. It didn't stop for about 45 minutes because there was just kind of a moment we were just like, fuck it.
Wow.
And we never sounded not tight.
That's
Like,
something
I don't know if there's
amazing.
any other configuration I will ever play with where I'll feel that comfortable to be like, all right, we're just going to go and not come back. And like we'd weave songs in and out, and none of them were on the set list. So I know that just split from a kind of a tangent from what your question was, but yeah, I think I realized more and more how special those compositions were, but then even more so like how those songs evolved, like because another thing that I did in the recent few weeks is listen back to the albums and some of the live albums and stuff just to get my fingers like ready. And I was playing around the house. Also, my son had never heard that stuff, and my wife had heard some of it, but it was kind of interesting just having it on again because when you're in the middle of that, you never listen to yourself. So the songs evolved so much over time. So if you listen to the original record, it's like this little excerpt of what it became because these jams would turn into like these super long evolved things that like, oh man, the album didn't have any of that on there. So it's interesting, and then figuring out which version we're going to do. It's like, are we going to do the 2007 16 version or the 2006 version or what?
Yeah, definitely. I
So
think
it's
I
been
think
fun.
there's something special both about playing with siblings, right? Because they have a connection that you can
Mm-hmm.
kind of slide into, and there's really like there's just that telepathy that you were describing, and also the kind of the stripped down configuration of a trio versus a bigger band, which of course
Yeah,
solo became at various points. But
yeah,
you guys all are moving together in a very slender way, which is pretty cool. I was
yeah. There's something special about that when you can. I mean, there's only three of us and only two harmonic instruments. So if we want to change keys or do whatever, it's
yeah.
so easy versus dealing with six or seven people, and it's a little easier to go off script, and you've got three people that and also that know each other so well, you know.
Definitely. Speaking of, I guess that kind of configuration, one of your other concurrent projects now is your work with Stanton Moore. You guys obviously have
Yeah.
a new album out and have been playing together a lot. In a lot of ways, that reminds me of kind of some of the feel of So Live. Have you seen parallels between those two projects, and what is working with Stanton and now going back to So Live made you realize about both those projects and how they.
I love both. It's really different energies, and different, even though it's the same instrumentation. But I love, Stanton has such a unique approach to the instrument and a unique touch, and especially with our project, it's kind of showcasing a lot of his, different sides of playing, and there's a lot more. There's like brushes on the record, and there's like more shuffles and different. It's not just straight ahead funk. So it's been a little bit kind of a little more like storyteller style of our shows in terms of
Yeah.
talking about the songs and talking about the artists that we covered. We did it was a concept album, um, covering a lot of our favorite female singers. So yeah, they are. I mean, I've come to realize that an organ trio, like you're saying, it's so nimble because you can move around so easily, and I love that element, of being able to kind of be really spontaneous in the moment. And yeah, I've loved working with Stanton and with Eric Finland, who's just such a great musician. So yeah, it's been this last couple of years has been kind of fun reconnecting with that beginning again of doing the organ trio thing.
It's funny. I just thinking while we're talking that I remember when you first kind of turned towards more singer songwriting music and had started singing as well as playing guitar. That was a shift for a lot of people who had been listening to your music for so long. But I'm sure there's a lot of people who kind of came to your music in more recent years who it's now going to be a shift back where you're not singing and you're actually focusing
Yeah,
yourself
I
on the
know it
guitar.
is. I'm kind of bobbing and weaving. Like certain people came to
Yeah,
the shows at the last run and they're like, wanting to hear my Always album and
yeah,
some of my other stuff. And I do some of the, actually with Krasno more, we do like a few of my songs, my vocal songs here and there. But yeah, and I have like two albums in the works right now of vocal stuff. One with Otis McDonald, a collaborative project where I'm singing, and then I'm doing like an acoustic album actually where I'm gonna redo some of my older songs, but then also do some record some of the songs that I've written for other people, like Rescue Trucks Banner and Neville, um, and do some of like my own versions of those. So I'm just like at this point in my life where I just want to do all the things that make me happy. And I think one of the things that I'm trying to take advantage of is like in the streaming age, consistency and like putting out music kind of as much as I can is okay. You know what I mean? And it may not they may not all go to number one, but it not only kind of fulfills my creative passion, but it just like feeds the algorithm, as they say, or as
yeah.
my manager says. So it's a fun time. I have my own studio. I can and I'm also producing a lot of other people right now, which has been fun and exciting too.
Excellent. Well, one of the most exciting things for us here in Relics coming up is your Newport Jazz set with Soul Live. What can we expect from this? I know that's a festival set, so you have
Yeah.
people from who are both familiar with the band as well as some new listeners. Is it going to be more classic Soul Live, or are we going to have some guests?
Yeah.
What do you look forward to?
I think we're probably due. I mean, our unless somebody wants the kind of the thing we've been talking about is that if guests want to come up and they know our music and they
Yeah.
know our songs, we may do some of that. But I think it's going to be our songs. It's going to be our record. It's going to be our stuff. We've been really mixing it up from the first couple albums, and a little bit of the Rubber Soul Lodge stuff. I mean, the great thing is we have such a huge pile of music to choose from that it's kind of like festival set will be like, let's pull out, just our favorite shit. And our last album, Cinematics, we did, it's like an EP that came out. It's been a while now, but pre-pandemic by a few years. We never really toured that record, so we've been having fun playing those songs. And again, like I said earlier, um, stretching them out and letting them evolve, where they never got that shot the way the other albums did. So that's been kind of fun because I really love that album, and it's not one that really got a lot of touring life. So probably hear a few of those, then you'll hear like a lot of the classic early stuff too.
Awesome. Well, we're excited, and we'll see you in a few weeks up at
All right,
Newport.
I'm looking forward to it.